Musk, a name that's evolved from an animal secretion into a human sensation. How fitting that someone aiming to colonize Mars shares his name with a scent used to mark territory. It's rather like Mother Nature engaging in prophetic nominative determinism, naming a future billionaire after something that attracts attention while simultaneously warning others to keep their distance. Consider how perfectly the word captures its current bearer. Both the noun and the man are powerful attractants that can become overwhelming in high concentrations. Rather like a perfume that starts as intriguing and ends up making the whole room need fresh air. The etymological journey is delicious. From the Sanskrit muska meaning testicle via the musk deer's scent glands, to now representing a man shooting his cars into space. Some might say the symbolic trajectory remains remarkably consistent, a tale of masculine display just with a larger budget. Oh, what volatile vision drives this Silicon Valley sphinx, sometimes genius, sometimes jester. Tesla's helm in one hand, Twitter's bird in other. What mercurial merchant is this, who launches rockets while tweeting dreams? Like some modern Prospero, commanding his technological tempest with tweets and memes. Tesla, what electric chariot maker is this, that dares challenge Detroit's gasoline empire? Like Mercury's winged sandals transformed into silent wheels, these battery-powered vessels glide with digital grace. See how they spell sexy rebellion against combustion's century-long reign. Each vehicle serves as both transport and statement, rolling proof that green ambition need not sacrifice swift pleasure. Perhaps the most ironic corporate appropriation since Nike made a swoosh worth more than most Greek temples. Named after a man who died penniless in a hotel room, talking to pigeons, now representing a company that turns electrons into billions. It's rather like naming a fast food chain after Gandhi. The sheer audacity of the misalignment is almost artistic. History's greatest bait and switch. The original Tesla wanted to give free energy to the world. The new one sells batteries at a premium. Rather like watching your childhood hero's name become a luxury brand, where celibate inventor's name became capitalism's electric dreams. Imagine if Einstein was a designer handbag or Newton a premium apple juice. A dead genius, lending his name to charge the batteries of shareholder value. What delicious irony that a man who struggled to commercialize any of his inventions now has his name plastered on one of the most successful marketing exercises in history. It's capitalism's version of divine, right? Borrowing the gravitas of a dead genius to sell cars to the living. The Federal Reserve, the greatest piece of financial theater ever staged. What a masterfully misleading name. It's about as federal as Federal Express and as reserved as a caffeinated squirrel. Rather like calling a casino the Institute of Wealth Conservation. Technically, the money is indeed being conserved by someone else. Consider the linguistic sleight of hand. Reserve implies careful hoarding, like a squirrel preparing for winter. Yet here we have an institution that creates money with the enthusiasm of a child discovering the copy-paste function. It's rather like having a Department of Temperance run by bartenders. The true genius lies in its architectural choice. A neoclassical temple design suggesting the sacred wisdom of antiquity, when really it's more akin to a very sophisticated printing press with delusions of godhood. What monetary guardian is this that commands the dollar's destiny? Like ancient oracles whose every word moves markets, the Fed's governors watch inflation's omens and gross portents. Jerome Powell, their modern Delphic voice, speaks in careful riddles that send stocks soaring or plunging. Through dual mandates they navigate. Employment's fullness and price's stability, their twin stars. Rather like dressing a magician in physicist's clothes and calling their tricks quantum monetary policy. Constitution, a paper chain that binds and frees. How deliciously ironic. A word that simultaneously represents constraint and liberation. A constitution is rather like a paper chain we willingly wrap around ourselves, claiming it protects our freedom while methodically defining its limits. It's the ultimate paradox. We establish rules to secure our liberty, write down restrictions to guarantee our rights, and create boundaries to protect our boundlessness. Rather like a parent who builds a fence around a playground. Is it to keep the children in or the dangers out? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. The word itself comes from the Latin constitutio, meaning to establish, to set up. But what we're really setting up is a beautiful fiction. The idea that by writing down our aspirations for justice and fairness, we somehow make them more real. Like trying to capture lightning in a bottle, or perhaps more accurately, trying to trap wisdom in words. It's particularly clever how we've elevated these documents to almost religious status. These paper shields against our own worst impulses. We speak of them with reverence, interpret them like sacred texts, and argue about their meaning with the fervor of theological scholars debating divine will. President. From the Latin presidir, to sit before, though perhaps, to sit above while pretending to be among, would be more accurate. It's rather like calling a lion chief cat, and expecting it to behave like a house cat with better PR. Consider the magnificent contradiction. We've created a position of near monarchical power, but insist its occupant wear a business suit instead of ermine robes. Rather like putting a CEO in charge of a kingdom, but making them pretend they're just having a really long board meeting. What mortal monarch is this, crowned by ballots, not birthright? Like a Roman consul raised by the people's voice, yet bearing powers a Caesar might envy. See how they age before our eyes, these temporary kings who bear democracy's burden. They hold court in Washington's marble halls, commanding armies, yet bound by laws, wielding power, yet tethered by checks and balances. The true genius lies in the term's corporate blandness. President sounds so innocuous, like someone who might approve your mortgage application, not someone who can launch nuclear weapons over their morning coffee. The time limit is perhaps the most delicious irony. For 8 years to play at being king, just long enough to develop a taste for power, but not quite long enough to commission a proper palace. Elected not anointed, powerful yet constrained, temporary yet consequential, symbol and servant both, while history watches and judges their performance. Throne, what seat of power is this, where mere furniture becomes majesty? Like Richard II's hollow crown, it transforms common wood and gilt to symbols most profound. See how it stands alone, raised steps above the common ground, an empty chair that speaks of fullest authority. Yet mark how like Duncan's throne it sits, both threatening and threatened, promising both glory and doom to those who dare to rest upon its heights. As sitting down, we've managed to convince ourselves that certain bottoms are indeed more divinely appointed than others. If you craft a chair with sufficient pomp and gild it adequately, it transforms its occupant from a mere mortal into someone who can declare wars over breakfast. It's arguably the world's most successful piece of method acting equipment. Sit upon it, and suddenly your opinions become decrees, and your whims become law. How we've managed to make a chair so uncomfortably ornate that its occupant must surely be important. Who else would endure sitting on what is essentially weaponized furniture? It's rather like wearing a crown, a headache made of precious metals to prove one's right to give others headaches. Empty. It speaks of authority, occupied. It transforms its sitter, coveted. It drives ambition's plot abandoned. It stands as history's marker, where wood and gold conspire to elevate posterior to divine. A furniture piece's cosmic joke-making mortals think they're gods by raising them 3 feet closer to heaven. Election. That grand theatrical production where democracy pretends it isn't just aristocracy with better marketing. It's rather like musical chairs played in slow motion, isn't it? A carefully choreographed dance, where we all pretend the music might actually lead somewhere new this time. The word itself comes from the Latin meligere, to choose, though perhaps to choose between pre-selected options would be more accurate. The ritual itself is a masterpiece of organized chaos, millions of people simultaneously performing the sacred rite of drawing little marks on paper, like a nationwide game of political tic-tac-toe. Rather like trying to steer an ocean liner by having everyone aboard lean in their preferred direction. What democratic pageant is this, where common citizens become kingmakers? Like Shakespeare's Roman crowds, swaying between Brutus and Antony, the electorate weighs competing visions. Campaign promises float like Macbeth's dagger, seeming solid, yet ever just beyond grasp. See how candidates traverse the land, like traveling players performing their parts, each claiming to speak truth while their opponents speak mere tales. Some strut and fret their hour upon the platform. Others whisper sweet promises into digital winds. Democracy's periodic fever, hope's masquerade ball, where change wears a familiar mask, each hoping to win the greatest role of all, while voters, like critics at a play, render final judgment. Blunt anger. Now there's a phrase that hammers rather than cuts. Think of it as the emotional equivalent of using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. While sharp anger might slice through social conventions with surgical precision, blunt anger is rather like showing up to a fencing match with a club. It's the linguistic equivalent of writing in all caps. Effective, certainly, but hardly subtle. It's rather fascinating how we've taken blunt, a word that literally means dull, and paired it with one of our most acute emotions. It's as if we're admitting that some feelings are too raw to be polished, too urgent to be sharpened on the whetstone of eloquence. What untempered fury is this, that speaks its mind without poetry's veil? Like Hotspur in his rage, all direct thunder and no lightning's grace. Oh, see how raw emotion strips away courtesy's mask, leaving truth naked and unadorned as Ajax before his madness. Here's no Hamlet's subtle plot, no Iago's crafty whispers, but rather Coriolanus in full voice, hurling words like uncarved stones. Yet mark how honest spite can be, when stripped of manipulation silk. The club in an arsenal of emotions, where sharp wit gives way to crude force. Poetry stripped of its meter, leaving only the beat. The White House. What a masterfully misleading understatement. It's rather like calling a volcano the warm hill or a hurricane the gusty afternoon. Consider the delicious irony. We've taken the seat of earth-shaking power and given it the most domestic of names. It's as if Zeus had labeled Mount Olympus the Cloud Cottage. The building's name suggests nothing more threatening than perhaps an overzealous approach to exterior maintenance. And the color choice. White, the color of purity and innocence, housing the grayest of political machinations. It's rather like dressing a wolf in sheep's clothing, then insisting on calling it the fluffy one in polite conversation. It's a Georgian mansion playing dress-up as a Greek temple. Democracies attempt to borrow gravitas from antiquity while maintaining a neighborly facade. Rather like putting a crown on a baseball cap and calling it constitutional monarchy. A pallid palace of paradox, where democracy plays dress-up in monarchical robes. Power's theater, painted pure to mask the gray of compromise.